Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate the partnership that we have with the International Home and Housewares Show, and in particular Phil and Perry for inviting GMDC to participate. I'm Mark Duchel with GMDC. GMDC is a trade association that creates partnerships and connectivity between retailers and suppliers, particularly around GM and health, beauty, and wellness. We put a couple of conferences on every year, and we have some services and some solutions that we provide to our members that create value 365 days a year. So we, again, appreciate the opportunity to be here and ask you if you have any questions. We'd love to talk to you about GMDC afterwards. Today we're going to talk about GM. The topic today is housewares and supermarkets, a profitable pair. I think everybody in this room would probably agree and understand that GM, and in particular housewares, can provide significant sales opportunities and growth to the supermarket channel. The challenge is, quite frankly, how do we ever talk about it and measure that information? There's a lack of data around GM as it relates to facilitating that collaboration, that conversation. This lack of data really gets in the way of the industry being able to collaborate and really gain an understanding in terms of what really matters. So GMDC launched a program 18 months ago. We went into, well, excuse me. Now, this lack of data really actually leaves the categories we're handicapped. There's really no way to measure what's going on in the category. For example, as a category manager, an executive sits down and tries to evaluate a department, it's difficult for them to know, for example, how big should the category be? How much space should be allocated to that category? What's the mix of items within that category? And then how does that mix really impact the shopper and the shopper basket as she shops? One of the things that we tried to do to solve this problem is GMDC, with its Educational Leadership Council, 18 months ago, got together with a number of retailers and said, let's solve this. And so we asked 6 retailers to give us all their scan data. They took their scan data, we put it in a pool, we started to cleanse it and look at it, and lo and behold, we discovered that no 2 retailers in our pool, 6 large retail chains, actually looked at GM the same way. They didn't classify it the same way. There's no common hierarchy. There was no way to communicate the similarities between the categories. And that left us with a big challenge, that all that data and all that work was effectively useless. At the end of that period, we decided, how are we going to fix this? We know there's a need. We know the industry needs a way to communicate and really begin to share and collaborate around GM. We connected with Nielsen. And in that process, we talked to Nielsen and said, hey, surely you guys have figured this out. And lo and behold, they had the exact same problem. For a number of years, they've been collecting data, scan data, on nearly 30 million SKUs. And they, too, had no way to communicate that information into the industry, no common hierarchy, no way for the industry to sort it and to understand it and to communicate it and to create a benchmark. One of the challenges, the lack of data, allows, there's very little opportunity for us to track sales and then benchmark performance, both on the retailer side and the wholesaler side. So we partnered with Nielsen. We gathered here in Chicago, actually, a number of retail executives, supplier executives, our friends from Radian and Nielsen, and we began to sort through this data and decide, how do you make sense out of 30 million SKUs? After a number of months, we actually came up with a hierarchy. And so 30 million SKUs now sort themselves into what's represented on this slide, which is 18 mega categories. So these 18 mega categories you see here, all 30 million SKUs roll into in terms of the top of the pyramid. Underneath this, there's an additional 200 we'll call level 2. So each category has about 10 or so additional breakdowns of subcategories under each one of these level 1s. After that, there's an additional 500 level 3s. So if you look at things like household or kitchen, so in kitchen you go to cookware would be a level 2, and under cookware you start to see pots and pans and those components. So all in all, there are 800 categories today that we're prepared to deliver as a solution to the industry to allow us to not only have a common language around, but more importantly, to be able to benchmark performance and create collaboration. The whole purpose here is not just to organize data better, but really find a way to drive performance and sales. Again, this whole idea of creating a solution was really around not just doing another project, not doing a research project, not creating a study, something that you printed once and it was never used again. This is really a resource for the industry to use, a solution for, again, both parties to collaborate around, and also to have this common language, this framework, so that when the retailer and a seller got together, they could actually talk about what was working and try to identify best practices. And then lastly, once we had great data, which is important and certainly missing in the industry, we wanted to find a way to create some deep dives. So what really is happening? How do we recognize and understand the trends in the industry, and then who's doing a better job of it, both on the retail side and on the supplier side? So this data hierarchy really serves as the backbone of the way we're going to deliver this solution, and we'll be using Nielsen's Answers as a platform, a technology platform for the industry to use to gather the data, look at it, and really slice and dice it. It's an excellent tool. Many retailers and suppliers have been using it in categories outside of GM, and we're excited about the opportunity for Nielsen to share that with us. Let's talk a little bit about the size of the prize. So in GM, what we know about GM is it's a big business. In all outlet sales that Nielsen scans for and tracks, it's $814 billion in sales, of which GM represents 25, almost 26% of that, or $32.8 billion in sales. So in some cases, you hear the industry talk about has the supermarket channel lost the GM shopper or the GM trip. Well, they are doing $33 billion in GM sales. I think it would be a safe argument to say GM is important to the supermarket channel, and it's certainly important to the supermarket consumer. A little bit of the trends around it. So GM is trending up. It's very difficult to hear this information in the industry. If you ask, the general consensus would be either we're not sure or it feels like it's going down. The facts are general merchandise is trending up. In food, it's trending up the best, 2.6% growth. The all other outlet channels, 2.1%, and drug is seeing a slight decline in terms of GM sales. The challenge with this talks about averages, and averages don't do justice to the information and what we need to do. Averages are like the old adage: my feet are in the oven, my head is in the freezer, but on average, I'm about right. That's what happens when we look at averages. This next slide really shows one of the ways that we're dissecting this data to help the industry understand how the categories are performing differently by quadrant. So we have 4 quadrants. There's 190 retailers, supermarket retailers represented in the database. Roughly 89% of all scanned sales are represented in the database, so pretty good sample. The top quadrant, the 4th quadrant, is the best performing retailers, and the 1st quadrant is the lowest performing retailers. So this slide represents general merchandise in total. And as you can see, the leaders are significantly better prepared and performing better than the laggards. So again, they're growing. Their UPC count or their SKU count is up in the leaders, as well as their sales. And when you look at the laggards, or that first quarter, they're declining in UPCs or SKUs on display, and they're also seeing some significant declines in sales. Todd will show you a slide in a minute about a 2-year trend that's even more startling when you really begin to take a look at what's going on with leaders and laggards. This slide represents the 5 major categories in general merchandise, so baby, candy, pet, kitchen, and household. And again, you'll see leaders and laggards. The light gray bar is the laggards, the leaders is the blue bar. So here's a category, again, where baby, a major category in supermarket, they're both realizing decline, primarily due to diapers being sold on Amazon on a subscription basis. But again, a big gap, 6% gap between the leaders and the laggards in terms of who's performing well or not. You take a look at a category near and dear to the people in this room, kitchen. The laggards are down 2%. The leaders are up nearly 5%, so a 7% gap between leaders and laggards. If we talk about the average, we might be talking about a 1 or 2% increase. That's not the story. And the insights aren't about averages. The insights are about who's performing, and then what are those retailers doing inside that category to drive sales and productivity. There are a number of retailers in the supermarket channel that are excelling in all these categories, and others aren't. So the whole point is this data set will allow us to see and understand and recognize those opportunities. And a big part of the story inside GM that gets lost, again, we constantly talk about general merchandise, and as a result of the lack of data, it's easy to forget or ignore GM. It's very hard to ignore this slide, which says that GM represents somewhere in the magnitude of 1.7 to 2 times, and again, that's on average, so there's certain categories that will be 3 or 4 times the average contribution margin or profit contribution versus other categories in the store. So again, not only is the category important, not only does it drive, $30+ billion in sales, but its profit contribution is significantly greater than other fresh categories and other areas in the store, and it deserves its fair share of attention for that reason alone. Before I introduce Todd, Todd's going to walk through, has a presentation about some retail trends, some things going on in the industry that are exciting generally speaking, as well as some specifics around GM. And then we're going to moderate a retailer panel. But I'd like to really thank some of the sponsors that were part of this study. We had a number of, these are not cheap projects to put on, so the sponsors represented on this slide, we're indebted to them. They're doing a great piece of work for this industry, and again, we want to say thanks to them. So with that, I'll introduce Todd Hale, Senior Vice President with Nielsen.
Okay, good afternoon. So I'm going to continue this conversation about supermarkets and the profitable pair between general merchandise, particularly housewares and supermarkets. I want to start off with sort of a review of the landscape in terms of who's winning, what retail channels are growing the fastest today, and also looking forward in the future. Talk about what's selling today, and some interesting trends in terms of how inflation or demand is really having a big impact on overall marketplace performance. And then we're going to start a conversation, a little bit of a deep dive into how do you leverage some of these insights that Mark described around getting the most from housewares before wrapping it up and then turning it over to the panel discussion that we'll have. So if you look at the retail landscape in the U.S. today, think about consumer confidence. January took a dive. All the conversation around the increased payroll taxes, government's inability to get a solution done very quickly around the fiscal cliff, has consumer confidence still at levels at recessionary levels. We're still not at a level of confidence that you need to have a vibrant overall economy and a vibrant overall retail performance. But nevertheless, a lot of good news out there. Housing market doing well, prices are up, housing starts are up, auto sales, particularly trucks, are up in terms of construction workers buying trucks to build those new homes. But still, we have a long way to go to get to housing where it was before the bubble burst, if you will. Equity markets, I'm sure a lot of you are pretty happy about what's going on with your 401ks and other investments. The market's at near record highs. The two troubling areas around fuel cost are rising much faster this year than we've ever seen, and they will continue to rise, and adding that on to the overall impact of the increase in the payroll tax are the negative side of what's going on today. Inflation has abated the last few months for most departments, not all, but still consumers are paying a lot higher prices today than what they were. We talked about the government and the labor markets. Obviously, unemployment's improving. The number of people working is improving, but we'll talk a little bit about there's still a lot of ugliness out there in terms of what's really going on in terms of our labor markets. So with that as backdrop, if we look at the universe that we track at Nielsen, overall it's about a $755 billion industry, and it's growing about 3% versus a year ago. The growth is really coming from value retailers. In that value bucket, we've got mass merchandisers, supercenters, dollar stores, club stores, military's in there as well, growing by 5.1%. And C stores, convenience stores, growing by almost 5% as well. Supermarkets, the biggest overall channel, flat in overall dollar sales year over year. And again, an average. We know a lot of supermarket retailers are doing very well relative to the competition, but on aggregate, the channel is flat. And drug up just under 2%. And if you look to the future, if we look at history and try to project the future in terms of where the growth is going to be within our industry, e-commerce is going to drive compounded annual growth rates on a dollar basis of around 10% between now and 2017. You saw the results from Amazon.com. Their overall sales grew by $13 billion between 2011 and 2012. They grew from $48 billion to about $61 billion. Supercenters will continue to drive strong growth. Pet, club, dollar, drug. All those in green are going to drive growth faster than average and gain share. All those in blue, we're going to see some growth. Supermarkets are going to grow, but they're going to lose share because they're not growing faster than the average. Now, again, if you look at the long-term trend in supermarkets, the share decline is really slowing down. and we'll talk a little bit later about how some retailers, many of those that are going to be on the panel, or all of those on the panel, doing much better than the average. And so we see growth, but obviously some retailers are not performing as well. And another key trend going on today is fresh. Fresh is everywhere. Fresh is getting attraction from a lot of different retailers, whether they're food or non-food. I just read not too long ago that Tommy Bahama's, the clothing manufacturer, actually has food in some of their stores. So you've got drugstores and dollar stores, certainly Target expanding their P-Fresh section of the store. Fresh matters, food matters, so a lot of interesting excitement around food in our industry. And also some work we did last year that we're updating in about a week or so around, when you look at the trends, and we'll show those in a second at a category level, there's been some challenges relative to volume movement. So we tried to get an understanding around why some of the volume declines are there. Dollar sales are fine, but overall volume sales have been soft in some areas. And we asked consumers about what are they doing, what have they done more often in the past 6 months, and what really floats to the top, which I think is a huge opportunity for supermarkets and your industry, is the fact that more and more people are looking to prepare home-cooked meals. They're also looking to prepare home-cooked meals or take leftovers to work or school, and leftover management. They're serving leftovers, I think, again, a big opportunity for food containers and things of that sort. So a lot of interest in food. And I would expect that 2013 is going to be a lot about food. And the challenge really is going to come from which retailers, which manufacturers, which suppliers are really going to take on hold of that opportunity for growth and drive it farther than what it probably could be. So let's take a look at what's selling. So these are the major departments that we track at Nielsen. And an interesting trend in terms of what's driving growth. Inflation is having a huge impact on meat sales. Beef sales or prices are at an all-time record high. Actually, volume is down, but sales are up because of price increases. Real demand around alcoholic beverages. Without the advantage of price increases, we're drinking like there's no tomorrow. We're not having to pay any higher prices for alcoholic beverages, but the category is doing really well. Fresh produce, a lot of demand behind that too, although prices are up. Actually, volume growth is actually stronger than what we see on a dollar basis. And with this new hierarchy, rather than showing general merchandise down 1%, we're showing the overall department growing by 2%. So we haven't gotten these new figures into our overall delivery system at Nielsen. It's going to take some time before we make that happen. But if you look at the picture in terms of what's happening in dollar growth across the store, it's a pretty bright picture. Unfortunately, when you look at unit sales, you see a lot more red than you see blue. Higher prices have led to consumers to cut back on some of the spending they have on a unit and volume basis. Now, looking at supermarkets, not quite the same picture, a little bit different story in terms of we see a lot more red, but again, with this new hierarchy, we actually show general merchandise being up 3% within supermarkets. And again, we see some issues with demand as well as inflation driving overall growth and performance within supermarkets. So, I was asked a lot this last year about, what's going on? Why are we having, if things are improving, why do we still continue to see some softness in numbers relative to overall volume sales? And I kind of see it as sort of like death by 1,000 cuts. There's a lot of stuff going on that creates unique challenges and opportunities in our industry. We know the job market's improving, but many people coming back to work are coming back at pay scales less than what they had before they lost their job. This income squeeze is a real thing. We've seen 9 out of the last 12 years, we've seen median household income decline in this country, and it's not likely to stop anytime soon. We're getting older, obviously. The older we get, the less we spend on food, the more we spend on health care. Again, creates some challenges and opportunities. This recession led people to delay having kids, and those who are having kids tend to be multicultural. Over half the kids born in the US today are multicultural. Immigration slowed in this country because there are better opportunities outside of this country, and immigration does help fuel population growth and growth in kids. We've seen some amazing stats in terms of the number of people on food stamps and the importance that that program has on overall supermarket sales and manufacturer sales. We talked about gas prices, payroll taxes, weather impact had a huge impact last year. First quarter of last year when it was hot during the winter, cold weather categories didn't do very well. It was a great first quarter for insecticides because bugs came out early. We were charcoaling, cooking out earlier, just some very interesting trends and how weather impacts overall. But the two areas that really have impacted our industry more than anything has been higher prices and promotion support. And so we've got to get our arms around that and figure out how we deal with fluctuating commodity input cost and how we manage our businesses accordingly. Away from home consumption is now starting. It was improving. I think we're going to see it take a hit because of what's happening with gas prices and also what's been happening with payroll taxes. Again, an opportunity for food at home. Prepared meals has been one of those areas of the store that's done extremely well. We'll show you some facts and figures on that, and the perimeter of the store generally doing pretty well. We've seen tremendous changes in consumption patterns, particularly related to snacking occasions. The breakfast occasion has taken a particularly tough hit. And a do-it-yourself movement in some very unusual categories. Borax 20 Mule Team, a product that was advertised on black and white TV in the 50s when I was growing up, is growing by 80% year over year because women are now making their own detergents. And you actually go on Amazon.com and buy the ingredients to make a 2-year supply of laundry detergent for like $21. So just some amazing ways that consumers are taking advantage of opportunities to drive more value into their homes. But look at the perimeter of the store. This is a volume trend. If you look at dollar sales trend across the perimeter of the store, and this includes both barcoded as well as random weight non-barcoded products, dollar sales are up in all fresh departments. There are some that are losing sales because of price increases, so fresh meat, particularly beef-related, prices are up 5.4%, so volume's down. But a real growth engine for deli prepared foods. Sushi is way up, prepared snacks, meals growing at high double-digit numbers, fresh seafood, fruits. So again, a lot of retailers putting a lot of focus around perimeter of the store, and it's helping them to drive sales success. And so what's going to happen this year? If you look back on 2010, which was the last year that we were paying 6.2% rate of tax on Social Security, we were quoted a lot back then. If you couldn't eat it, you didn't need it, because what was driving growth across the store was mostly edible departments or edible categories. Flash forward to 2012, it's nice to see there was a mixture of both edible and non-edible categories on that list, but I would expect that 2013 is going to be a little more towards the food side of things in terms of consumers' interest in eating at home and how that's going to drive more growth in food. Again, an opportunity for this industry. So let's now do a little bit of a deep dive in terms of how do we get the most out of housewares and supermarkets. And you know, if you look at some new stats that we have around item share and dollar share, you'll notice that item share is a lot higher for some of the key household, home, and kitchen categories, if you will. That speaks to maybe an opportunity to find ways to be more productive with that assortment. You'd like to see a better balance there, especially in kitchen, where we have a high index in terms of more item share than dollar share. So an opportunity to leverage these insights and think about what are the items we really need that matter most to our shoppers. And if you look at across the major segments in the department, not much change in overall share year over year. You see who are the big players in this industry and who are not, but the shares haven't changed much. But again, when you do a deep dive into what's the item share configuration relative to dollar shares, you see some opportunities that, you know, maybe bakeware and cookware justify more space than they're getting today, broadly speaking, across the industry. It's going to matter depending on who you are as a retailer. And maybe we've got some assortment optimization issues within gadgets that we might have to think about. Maybe we need less rather than more, generally speaking. And also, to pick up on Mark's comments, when you look at what's happening in the industry in terms of the leaders, in terms of their ability to drive significant growth relative to the third and fourth quartile, or the first and second quartile in this comparison, it's pretty impressive. The winners are doing the right things. They recognize the opportunities in general merchandising, and they're taking advantage of the department and a more holistic approach to how they sell general merchandise along with food. And also, it's just some other deep dive metrics from this. And when you look at overall sales per store, it's clearly, you know, the advantage goes to the leaders. They're selling more. They're driving stronger growth. Generally speaking, they have more UPCs, but that doesn't always dictate who the winner is. And also they're making some decisions on how many UPCs they have in their store year over year. And the first quartile, when you look at that sales per UPC per store, looks great, a high number. But if you continue to cut assortment in that quartile, you're going to see your sales long-term decline, and you're going to drive your shoppers elsewhere, because these are categories that are in demand for shoppers today, and if you don't have that assortment, you're driving your shoppers someplace else, and an opportunity for them to spend elsewhere, not just on housewares, but also in food-related categories. And we're going to talk a little bit about this concept with our panelists, but you know, I think we need to think long and hard of how we leverage the total store and think about mixing up the store a little bit to drive more engaging shoppers' engagements around solution sets. In this case, taking non-food departments, general merchandise, cookware departments, putting them next to the meat department during outdoor cooking season. So why do we make shoppers walk the whole store to find what they need to satisfy a shopping basket? Bring a solution to them. Quite honestly, women in the neuroscience work that we do at Nielsen tend to respond to these kinds of engaging solution sets. It's us men that are designing these up and down boring aisles that are confusing women. So I think there's an opportunity to think about how we leverage some insights and work together around the total store to drive sales. So a couple key takeaways before we bring up the panel. First off, this economic divide continues. The haves are out there shopping and spending. The have-nots are really constrained, but there's opportunities across the spectrum to win. And again, a big interest in at-home meal preparation and overall leftover management. And how do we really bring that into our messaging and our conversation with shoppers inside and outside the store? The competition's really heating up around the food fight, but we think proper analytic and in-store focus around GM can make winners out of the supermarket operators who really want to leverage GM along with food. And in terms of some more micro opportunities around general merchandise, you know, again, as Mark alluded to, 25% of GM is captured on an all-outlet basis, but opportunity to drive that development in supermarkets and grocery. We see some structural issues in grocery where GM, home, household, and kitchen can tend to carry more items in their dollar share, so again, some opportunities to think about how we tweak assortment. And finally, this opportunity around collaboration. How do we collaborate between retailers and their manufacturer partners to really do a better job of driving GM space? Bakeware and cookware justify more space. The economic climate and consumer interest for at-home meals should drive increased cross-merchandising opportunities between food and general merchandise. And I would urge you to, what are you doing to drive this wave? When we think back what happened over the last 5+ years around economic downturn and growth, too many retailers and manufacturers sort of sat back and watched things happen to them. I think now is a big opportunity to really think about how do you jump on the bandwagon of general merchandise and food to drive overall success in your stores. So with that, let's bring up the panel. Bill Anderson from H-E-B, Dwayne Raybon from Bilo Winn-Dixie, and Steve Davis from Weiss Markets. So we're going to ask the panelists a few questions, and then I think we'll have plenty of time for some Q&A at the end, too. Okay, so welcome, and I think you heard me sort of my opening comments around payroll taxes, increased gas prices. Steve, we talked about this a little before this meeting. Looks like a real opportunity for food. And the new GM category, at least in the new hierarchy that we have at our exposure now, tells us that there's an opportunity to get even better there. So a two-part question. And first is, do you think it's going to be a good year for food in 2013? And then secondarily, how much are you leveraging granular shopper insights around GM to help drive growth in your stores? Steve?
Well, certainly I hope that food is a good year for food because we're banking on it being a good year for food. In the GM piece of what we do, we're very much into a cross-merchandising program in our stores. We feel it's critical to make sure that if you're doing off-shelf displays or tie-ins for seasonal, that the general merchandise piece of what you do is tied in there, and it's the main thrust of what we try to get done and sales that we try to drive with that particular program. Also with that, on our end caps in our stores, we're tying in general merchandise products, for instance, baking pans with cake mixes and soup bowls with end caps of soup, this time of year. All of that seems to help drive our general merchandise business pretty significantly during certain times of the year. As it relates to insights, the data sets that are now available to us will help us to get certainly a lot closer to where we want to be with our consumers and try to understand a little bit better about what are they actually demanding, what kind of food prep type programs are there out there that we can take advantage of and make sure that those particular products are available to our consumers.
Dwayne, food and insights.
Yeah,
what are your insights on that?
We also believe that food's going to be very important as we move into 2013. Being a supermarket, when a customer walks into our store, their first mission that day is to buy food for the next 5 to 7 days to feed their family. So we believe that if we're going to win in 13 as that in-home meal preparation grows, and we believe it will grow in 2013, we have to find ways to make it easier for the consumer to fix at home. We have to find ways for them to have fun during meal preparations. And if you think about the in-home meal experience, there are just so many categories that it touches. You had several of them up on the board. One of the categories that you were talking about is showing a lot of growth, even though there's been inflation there, is fresh meat. When I see fresh meat growing as a category, that's good for us, because that means people are eating more at home, and we get that opportunity to take care of that. And as far as the insights, I think the deeper we can go to understand what our customers are looking for, the better off we'll be, the better decisions we'll make. A lot of times when we look at data, you can get kind of that top-level view. I mean, you see the macro trends that you can go after, but I think the real wins come in being able to really drill down and find those niche items that people are looking for, whatever that most recent trend is. It might be an underlying trend that you can maximize as consumers are coming into your outlet.
Great. Bill, H-E-B and food?
Consistent with what Steve and Dwayne have said, we look at solutions. We look at making it easy for the customer. I'm a firm believer that customers don't think of channels like we do. I think that they look for solutions to their problems. And if the fact of the matter is that the food retailer of whatever choice they have is the place they frequent most often because of the needs that they have for their family. And if we're not providing the solutions in a compelling enough way, then shame on us. But frankly, we have the best shot of any of what we would call our channels of capturing that trip, in my opinion. And I think that gives us a lot of optimism, a lot of hope, because people are, as you showed, cooking more at home and spending more time in their kitchens, and particularly for this business that we're all talking about today, I think there's a ton of upside.
Well, given the diversity of your shoppers in your market, obviously, you have to cater a store to what's going on with the shoppers who shop that store too. So I'm sure your connection with Hispanic shoppers and not is pretty important to you as well.
Absolutely. We don't necessarily think about Hispanic marketing the way that the industry talks about it. We think about that's just our customer every day.
Right.
And so we've been in our market for many, many years and studying that customer and learning from them and trying to provide solutions for them in a way that creates value for them at price points that they can afford, because there's a certain aspect of that value is very important. So.
Dwayne, I talked about the Retail 2017 and what the future looks like, and right now the share erosion for supermarkets continues, but again, there are those that are winning pretty effectively. How important is it, though, for you to have some benchmarks to think about how well you're doing in general merchandise and other departments relative to your competition?
It's critical. I'll dovetail onto a comment that Bill just made, because we're looking at it the same way. You need to understand what your competitive landscape looks like. You need to understand what other retailers and other classes of trade are doing. But I think channel blurring now is at an all-time high. We are trying to work backwards from that, so we want to understand the landscape, but at the end of the day, there's one customer, and that customer has a certain amount of money they're going to spend. And we believe we need to understand the competition so that we're doing the right things in store, because ideally what we want them to do is turn left into our shopping center versus somebody else's shopping center. So we're taking it from a little different perspective and starting with the common denominator, which is the customer, and trying to understand what exactly is that customer looking for, regardless of what class of trade they shop in, and then understand how we can deliver that for them when they do come visit our store.
Yeah. Bill?
The insights are critical. I think there's a lot of things, depending upon where you're on the continuum of your evolution of your GM program, is at the beginning they can help you tremendously with space allocation and simple things like that. That's identifying where you should put your effort, where are the big buckets, where's the volume, where's the growth. And then as you evolve, I think you can get more fine-tuned into that and start to develop, what we've been talking about, which are more fine-tuned solutions for customers. Provides opportunity to figure out how you're going to merchandise differently, as Steve mentioned a minute ago.
Steve, benchmarks or execution? What's more important?
I think execution is certainly more important out at store level, but you got to have the data. I'll tell you, years ago, the data that we had was our own proprietary data and data that you would get from a vendor. But that doesn't mean that you had or you were carrying all the right items. With these new data sets, it's going to allow us to understand that. It's going to allow us to understand where the gaps are. What is the guy down the street doing that he's successful with that we may be able to take, an opportunity to look at and maybe do the same thing. But execution is important. Yeah, if you don't have the execution at store level, as you guys all know, the best plan in place can't be successful unless they get the right execution. So.
You know, Todd, I think the one thing about benchmarks we haven't talked about is that it provides you with an opportunity to communicate with your own organization as well. Mm-hmm. So it gives you a platform to be able to talk about, here are the potential areas we're missing, or here's where we're frankly leading the market, and we need to keep doing more of that. But in the past, without that, you really are flying blind, talking very subjectively with not a lot of data to back up any of your conversations.
Right. So, Bill, you know, I talked about this integrated shelf set in the meat department, shared that example, and I do think we've seen more innovation in our industry around trying to create solution sets to try to delight shoppers more so than ever before. Is that something your company is looking to do to create a more pleasurable shopping experience? And are you doing it on your own, or are you trying to leverage insights from your manufacturer partners too?
We absolutely do that, and we do use our manufacturing community to help us with both experience as well as expertise. The way that manifests itself in our stores is via cross-merchandising, as Steve talked about, creating that solution for the consumer who doesn't have a lot of time, giving them something that they can't get online. And so as you think about, obviously e-commerce is both a competitor in many cases, and then retail stores that have their own websites is actually a supplement to their business. But providing something that keeps them engaged in the retail store rather than feeling like they can get that same experience online. I think that's really important. I think we can do some things in store that you don't get the same experience and provide some solutions that you don't see.
Yeah. How much is it training of your associates in that too?
It's part of it's training, part of it's just culture, part of it's expectation, as Steve talked about, and execution. And you know, it's hit and miss, but I would say if you're consistent with it over time, you'll get to the point where it becomes second nature for the stores. And in fact, they end up being the drivers in many cases of some of the ideas because they're the ones that are on the floor every day talking to customers. And if you'll just listen to them, they'll many cases give you the idea that you hadn't even thought of.
Right. Steve, any exciting new things at Weiss? Shake it up a little bit.
Certainly, there's a lot. Well, you know, to Bill's point on execution, I mean, you really have to encourage the stores to get creative, you know, and create those displays that are going to wow that customer. You also have to bring your ad alive, and I think I've talked about this before. You know, you put an ad on the street, you spend a lot of money on special pricing and all that kind of thing, and if you don't make that ad come alive at store level with good merchandising, then why do it? And the customers are really looking for that. It's an expectation that they have now.
So Dwayne, new Winn-Dixie stores, been very impressed with the look and feel, a little more fun and exciting, laid out a little bit differently. How are they working for you relative to?
Doing well, and it really, it touches on all the things that both Steve and Bill were talking about, the cross-merchandising, the in-store execution. The latter part of that question was about the manufacturers and how we use the manufacturers. I think another, for us, and Bill alluded to it, is the manufacturers can bring us a perspective from across the country that we might not see. We get an opportunity to see what's going on inside of our competitive market, but sometimes we don't see what's going on the West Coast or what may happen in the Northeast. But we learn so much when we're in our stores and we're working our stores. So I could be in Louisiana, whether it be boiling season when crawfish are coming in, to see the creativity that a store manager comes up with because they understand their consumer. And those are things you can take out and you can replicate, because when you get them out of a region, and it could be Miami with our Cuban Latino business, but it's authentic. When you take an idea that a store manager is using and it's really working, and when you have to sell that back out to retail to get that execution, they know when it's an idea that's a good idea or when someone's throwing something against the wall. So a lot of times it's a matter of getting out and just working your own store sometimes and seeing what your people are doing, because we've got some very creative people out there that love running stores and love interacting with their consumers, and they find a way to do that, and that's been a way for us to kind of leverage great plans and then to get execution and buy-in.
Right. You know, Bill, you brought up e-commerce, and you know, I'm a firm believer that e-commerce is going to create some challenges for the supermarket industry, but also I think some opportunities. Mm-hmm. But these shaking up the box, making more integrated solution sets come at a cost, capital expenditure, and also some executional issues. Do you share the opinion that it's long-term, we're going to see boxes as we know them change or evolve to meet the challenges of e-commerce?
Yeah, I think they have to. you talked about earlier, the aisles and aisles in a store. That long term is not a compelling shopping experience, and frankly can be replicated online pretty easily. So I think we're going to have to come up with different merchandising strategies, different in-store experiences that we haven't used in the past, looking across the entire retail landscape, not just looking at inside of the supermarket area, but looking at what works in other areas as well. Yeah, that to me, if we don't, then that's a recipe for disaster if we don't end up changing some of the in-store experience.
All right. Steve?
I agree. It's critical. I'll give you an example of what we did this year for Valentine's Day, and it's pretty creative. And we took all of the Valentine candy, all of the flowers, all of the Valentine general merchandise, last day of the week before Valentine's Day, put it all up in a big display, and then we took one of our checkout lanes and made it a lover's lane. And every store executed on this. And this was a Founders Day for us, so people from the office were in, working the store, doing the things that they wouldn't normally do. And it created all kinds of excitement for this holiday. And we have done nothing but push our numbers up from a sales standpoint by doing those kind of things.
Yeah,
it's critical.
And so it's creating the illusion of getting people down an aisle through creativity, through marketing. So that's great to see.
Right.
Dwayne?
Yeah, it is a must. You used the example earlier where Amazon's now selling all the components for you to make enough detergent to last for a year or 2 years. We have to be able to do that. And it does come at an expense, but again, I think you can find ways to do it that are cost effective, and we've got to continue to push ourselves to offer those solutions for the consumers when they come in.
So final question before we open up to the audience, and that is, this new hierarchy sort of recasts general merchandise in a different light in terms of it provides structure to the categories, but also gives a perspective of what the shopper's looking for, how the shopper shops the store around general merchandise. So, how does this new shopper's perspective impact how you approach these categories? Is it any differently in terms of how you approach categories today versus historically built? You want to start off with that?
We've said it a bunch of times, but I think in the past you really went on internal data primarily. You knew what you were selling, but you really didn't have a good sense of what the industry was doing. Right. It was just through conversations at events like this. It was through talking to your supplier community, but you really had no hard data as far as what, if you look at the 4 quadrants, who's performing well and what are they doing, and what's making the difference. So I think that the data is going to provide a lot of that we haven't had in the past. And as I mentioned, where you are on that evolution of your GM business inside of your store, I think there's going to be a lot of benefit no matter where you are.
Yeah, so it's shopper focus first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
Steve?
I agree. It's a long time coming. This data is, it's always been perplexing in the general merchandise business to try to really understand, what are the consumers looking for. And in a lot of cases, we were just buying in products and putting up displays and doing things like that, so that we can understand whether or not that's the right item or that's the right program that we should have out there. Now with this data, it allows us to really hone in on what are the customers looking for, and then how do we buy products and display products in the stores that are things that they're demanding.
Dwayne, you get to wrap it up before we open it up to the floor.
One of the things that we're doing as we look at data is, and I mentioned earlier about kind of stepping back and starting with the customers, we've changed a little bit of the way we align our categories and the way we're managing them. So in the past, our GM and some of our food categories would have been separated, and we've started pulling some of that together and really doing more of an aisle management and managing it from a consumer perspective. When they come into your store and they shop, if they're in the baby aisle, I don't think a customer really knows whether that item rang up as HBC or whether that item rang up as GM or whether it was non-taxable, or they probably don't even realize all the different crazy names we call stuff. But they just know that they have a child or that they have a pet and that they need solutions. So we've started doing aisle management and taking that data and trying to teach our category managers to think backwards from that customer when they walk into that aisle, and how do I solve the whole baby solution, or how do I solve the whole pet solution. And it doesn't come without its challenges. It's to get a food category manager to take on GM category managers, and not the first instinct is, well, now I got more room for food. To make them understand the profitability and how all that pulls together. Mm-hmm. And conversely, teaching someone who's done GM for a long time the importance of food and how you leverage those and balance out that profitability and that mix to drive people in. So as that data is becoming more and more robust, I think it's given us the opportunity to try to manage the aisle a little bit different and manage it for the customer versus manage it in segments.
Yeah, great response. So I've got time, plenty of time for questions from the audience. I think we've got a couple roving microphones out there. So any questions you'd like to ask our panelists? First off, thank you guys. You did a great job. Appreciate it. So questions, audience? One up in the front row here.
Hi. Has the data you've seen actually caused you to expand certain general merchandise categories, and has it helped you convince people at the store level that cross-merchandising has to be a greater imperative?
I'll go ahead and start on that one. It's, I think it's reinforced and it's caused us to look at a couple of things differently. It's reinforced for us the need for food prep and some of the categories, whether it be cookware, bakeware, gadgets, the things that, as we talked about earlier, that help the family and help you prepare a meal at home. But I also think that that information is taking us into the other categories, and Bill touched on it, and he used the word solutions, and that's really the way we're looking at it's how do we create those entire solution sets inside of our store. So it's affirming some of the things that we thought, and it's also pointing us in some different directions. And the other thing that I'll say that the data is doing for us is that we really didn't have a lot of good information that we could carry to the rest of our company and share with our company internally about how relevant some of these categories actually are inside of our industry. So it's really done three things for us as we've looked at it.
Any add-ons?
No.
Consistent. Other questions?
Hi. I just have a question. At the beginning of your presentation, you had some data that said that about 48% of your shoppers are cooking at home. And I'm curious how you define cooking. Are they convenience cooking? Are they cooking from scratch? Like what kind of items are you carrying in your store? Pots and pans, or you said utensils, gadgets. Like how do you define cooking?
Well, in that context, what we asked the question is what have you been doing more in the past 6 months? And the biggest response was cooking more at home. The definition of cooking really depends on who you are as a shopper. We know that cooking for some is baking from scratch. We know cooking for others is microwaving a frozen entree. So there's a pretty wide spectrum in terms of the definition of cooking, and again, that's why you need to understand shopper insights pretty granularly across retailers as well. And I think the retailers that are winning today are doing a better job of understanding who their shoppers are and how much they're into cooking or not to recognize what part of the cooking aspect do they need to really focus their assortment and category assortment around. So, okay.
Thank you.
Back here.
Hi, I'm asking more from a sales perspective. I'm a manufacturer's rep who represents several different companies, and I've had some success in some supermarket chains, but I see all of you up there and would love to do business with your chains. And it's very difficult to get a buyer to answer an email, listen to me, or listen to some new ideas. And I've been, through experience, I've found more success when I go from the top and go to the principals or the presidents of the companies, because you're more amenable and listen to the big box, the broader ideas. So I'd like to ask each of you, what would you recommend for a salesperson who would like to break into your chains? What's the best way to get an audience?
Well,
Thank you.
I'll answer that one first, and that is attend the GMDC conference. And if you attend the GMDC conference, you're going to have an awful lot of retailers there that'll be very interested in your products, because that's why they attend the event in the first place. If you're having issues in getting responses from a buyer, what I will suggest to you is make sure that your information that you provide, whether it be through the email or whatever, is clear and concise, and also the products that you're trying to sell are ones that are going to be successful or have an opportunity to be successful in a supermarket.
The only other thing I would add is I would, events like this, Steve mentioned GMDC, We attend those. These are great forums because we're working with our teams and we're walking with our teams. So when we go up to the booths, we get an opportunity to talk about it. I would love to sit here and tell you that I absolutely know for a fact that none of my buyers have ever done that, but I also understand workload and I understand just the unbelievable amount of information that comes in every day. So I would encourage you to remain persistent, and I would also say that, just speaking from my perspective, is when different items or unique items are coming in and it goes to the buyer, I don't have a problem when that information comes my way as well. I don't get an opportunity to see everything that I could potentially see on the floor. Now I'm probably going to get 1,000 emails and everybody's going to see your new item presentation. So I just opened that door up, and I got 2 of my category managers here saying, yeah, but you're going to give them to me. But sometimes you have to go down that path, and it is. I mean, it's your job to sell, and it's our team's jobs to look at everything that's coming through. And I couldn't even give you a good quote on the number of new and innovative items. And if you've walked the floor out here, there's every shape, form of pot, pan, foil, cookware, bakeware. It's really mind-numbing, just the amount of things that are available. So continue to be persistent, continue to get in front of us, and we'll make sure from our perspective that we're doing everything we can to give everything the attention that it deserves to try to give it a fair shake.
And I was going to ask you for your personal email addresses so we could all have it.
Be happy to share that with you.
Thanks a lot.
I guess I'm next. Hello. Oh, sorry about that. Shelby Publishing Company. And just a brief question, really. What do you think the biggest obstacle or issues are for supermarkets, independents, for example, in focusing on more general merchandise opportunities in their stores? What's causing them from getting from 4% profit margins or sales to get it up to 10 or 15%?
From my perspective, coming from the food side before I came over to the GM side, I'll be perfectly candid with you. I think it's just, I think it's education. I grew up on the food side of our industry, and I was one of the guys sitting on the other side of the hall thinking about how was I going to get that GM space because I needed more pet food, or I needed more canned goods, and I needed more cooking oil, and I really did subscribe to that way of thinking. And as I've had an opportunity to move over to this side of the business, the biggest challenge I had coming in was, how do I get our executive team to understand how important it is? I didn't have anything tangible that I could really put in front of them to show them how big the prize was. That's one of the reasons why I'm excited about some of the data that's coming out, because when you throw some of these numbers out on what profit contribution is and how big these categories are, it adds relevance to those categories. And that was probably the biggest challenge for me. And I think that now that we've got some of that information, we just got to continue to put it in front of our teams and show them, you know, when you think about one more item in the basket and building trips and building basket and basket profitability, GM can really do that. And when you can show the value of that, I think you have a lot better opportunity of increasing space to the right size and getting those cross-merchandising things done.
Yeah, Dwayne's right. You need a leadership team that understands a bigger vision than just short term. They've got to see something longer term. They've got to understand that this will be, in some cases, a slow burn. It won't happen overnight, but the upside is tremendous. So, you know, many of us have an enormous share in food in our markets, but we don't have an enormous share on the GM side. So you need a collaborative leadership team, first of all, that is willing to at least engage in the conversation. If that doesn't happen, then you're basically going to be paddling upstream. You know, because what that does is that flows into store design, that flows into space allocation, that flows into ad allocation, and you know, if you're not in that position, it becomes a real challenge, to Dwayne's point. So there's no easy answer on that one. I think ultimately whoever's running the organization has to have a vision that we need to sell more than just food long term to be successful.
Yeah, the challenge out there that we have specifically is we probably have 5 different prototypes, and they range in size from 60,000 to 25,000 square feet. So can you put the same general merchandise program in a 60,000 square foot store that you can in a 25,000 square foot store? And you can't. So you have to be flexible in the programs that you're putting out there, and understand you know, where's the biggest bang for the buck. But space is always an issue in the general merchandise world, and to have good collaboration between others and other departments is very important. in order to get you know, your programs out there and the sales that you want to, you know, generate.
Right here.
Hi there. With more consumers cooking meals at home today, do you feel that also extends to more home parties? And if so, how are supermarkets addressing that need?
I think the Housewares solution has to be, we talk about both food prep as well as food serve, and then obviously food cleanup, and food storage, and everything else that goes with that. I think you have to have a full solution for customers. I agree that while social media has in some levels caused us to be further apart from each other physically, there's also a real movement for people to gather again too. So we have to be right in the middle of that. Obviously food is the primary gathering vehicle for that. That's what people do when they get together. And so, so I think you've got to be able to have the food serving, the food prep, food cleanup, food storage. If you don't have all four of those concepts combined, then you're really missing a segment.
You know, if you take a look at entertainment, Harris Teeter just opened a new format that's all about home entertaining around wines and food and parties and celebrations. They give classes inside of the store to help people with those solutions. But I think, you know, I live in Cincinnati. Mike Kroger, before Valentine's Day, had 8 sampling stations on wine one Saturday. You've never seen happier, buzzing people in that store on that Saturday, but I think those little things. You guys deal with a format too, your Houston format, where you've turned the parking lot into movies and artisans show up. I think just there's interesting ways that we can engage shoppers in some very great ways that get them better connected with you guys too.
Kind of wanted to touch on the idea of space in the stores and the flexibility. I'm wondering if you could touch on the importance of off-shelf displayers and how important that is to the category, even though it is growing and it's being supported more. I find that typically off-shelf displayers are received much more easily by some of the buyers, and if you see that continuing, especially with food being so strong this year. Thanks.
Yeah, I definitely think you'll see it continue to grow. Those points of interruption and tying in the right items in the right place in the store, and there are a lot of display vehicles, whether it be corrugate or wire baskets or wing racks, or there are a lot of ways to create that point of interruption. And I think the key to that is to make sure that it makes sense to the consumer that's walking into your store. So if it's going to be, you know, peelers and graters, let's make sure it's near vegetables and cheese. But and sometimes in the rush to get it out, we don't put enough thought into the execution piece, and you've got to make sure that as you come up with these ideas, and Steve said earlier, execution is extremely important, is that you give birth to that idea and you make sure that you see execution all the way through to the end to make sure it's in the right location, because it's just as much about having it done properly as it is having it on the floor.
Question in the back?
Thank you. One of the problems as a sales rep that I have in this cross marketing and merchandising idea, which I totally love, one of the issues that we have though is when you make your initial presentation and you have the first 3 digits of your UPC number and it gets into the produce section, for example, you can't get out. You're somewhat stuck in that produce section. If you want to cross market over into the you know, let's just say somewhere in the general merchandising or somewhere even in the HBA section, it's very difficult to get the help to get product in that area to increase the sales of that category. Do you see that issue?
I mean, I can't speak for the situation you talk about. I think that it's not something that I necessarily think we wrestle with a whole lot. I see products duplicated throughout the store on numerous bases. So I think part of it is creating a compelling story around where else it can be. And then, you know, at some level, you've got to get somebody to just try it. You've got to get somebody to test it and prove out the case. And if it's not at that retailer, then try it at another retailer. But come back with a case study of here's where it worked. And if you're not listened to then I mean, at the end of the day, they've got to try it if they want to continue to grow their business. But you can only do so much to get that up to that point.
I think to dovetail onto that, I mean, it comes back to the execution piece from our end. One of the things that helped us, that made it challenging in the past, is you assign ownership, but when you start putting things out in different outposts, sometimes it's easier for them to get missed. As we've, over the years, switched over to automated ordering systems and computer-generated orders where it's tracking and it's shipping product. If it hits that back door and it gets into that store, our people are going to find a home for it. It's not going to stay in the back room. And we've seen our execution get much better as we've gone on that process over the last 3 to 4 years, because as it sells, it's now showing up, and it kind of gives them that reminder when it shows up on the truck that, hey, I need to go make sure I get this in the right spot in my store.
Okay, we've got less than 2 minutes. Any other questions? Okay, so Steve, Bill, Dwayne, thank you very much. Applause for our panelists. They did a great job. Thanks for GMDC for sponsoring this and having Nielsen as part of this, and enjoy the rest of the show.